So you've probably been hearing a lot recently about the no deal that is very likely to happen, and is being, as we've said, covered this before, probably being engineered by the hard Brexiteers because it's exactly what they want. They never wanted a deal in the first place, they just wanted to leave the EU completely, and them basically being as vague as possible basically has gotten them what they wanted. However, there has now been, as we know, Britain is now going to start stockpiling food because of this possible scenario. And here we have from the Financial Times, British food stores ridicule Brexit stockpiling plans. So Britain's grocers say they've had no contact with the government about stockpiling food in anticipation of the UK crashing out of the EU in March without a withdrawal deal, and have ridiculed suggestions that it is their responsibility to begin the process. Dominic Raab, the Brexit Secretary, said this week he would ensure that the UK had adequate food supplies, but implied that it was the responsibility of the industry. It would be wrong to describe it as the government doing the stockpiling, he told MPs. But one supermarket chief said the government's position was ridiculous and demonstrated complete naivete about the way the sector worked. Ian Wright, the chief executive of the Food and Drink Federation, said, "I would be very much welcome to a conversation with the government." The possibility of food shortages has become a political issue in recent days, as ministers have ramped up preparations for a major disruption at UK borders if Britain leaves on the EU on the 29th of March without a deal. Senior executives at several major UK companies have begun to voice alarm at the prospect of a no-deal Brexit following Theresa May's inability to win consensus among her governing Conservative Party over a compromise plan with Brussels. The EU has begun to warn of the possibility of failing to reach a Brexit deal, with Michel Barnier and the European Commission's lead negotiator casting doubt on the Prime Minister's plan to keep the UK within the EU's customs for goods. "We have doubts that it can be done without putting at risk the integrity of the customs union, our common commercial policy and regulatory policy and fiscal revenue," Mr Barnier said after meeting with Mr Raab in Brussels. France's Europe Minister, meanwhile, Nathalie Louise, I think that's how you say it, on Thursday raised the possibility of a brutal divorce with the UK and the EU, separating mid-acrimony without any deal in place at the border. "With no deal, we should start with new tariffs, new controls, and that means, of course, traffic jams in Calais and at every port in Europe, welcoming goods and people coming from the United Kingdom," she said. Even if Britain left its borders open to allow imports from the EU, ministers are braced for the imposition of controls in Calais and other ports for traffic heading from the UK that could quickly bring all cross-channel traffic to a complete halt. Ministers are already drawing up plans to close the M26 motorway in Kent to turn it into a vast lorry park in the event of a no-deal Brexit, raising questions about the availability of food, and some 40% of the UK's foodstuffs are imported. Stockpiling of food is not a practical response to a no-deal Brexit, and the industry has not been approached by the government and is to begin planning for this, the British Retail Consortium has stated. So this is their statement: "The retailers do not have the facilities to house stockpiled goods. In the case of fresh produce, it is simply impossible to do so. Our food supply chains are extremely fragile," the BRC said, and it was vital to find a deal to maintain a frictionless trade. A senior executive at a large British supermarket chain said that the government had not talked to the industry about maintaining food supplies, and accused ministers of misunderstanding how food supply chains function. "It is ridiculous," the executive said. "It has become scary and it shows how far the government is from reality of how things work. It is generally worrying. Supermarkets say they operate a sophisticated just-in-time supply model. Fresh food cannot be stockpiled for more than a few days, and while there was not enough warehouse space to hold large quantities of non-perishable ambient goods, the government officials said that they have been in tense meetings in Whitehall to work out how to answer the question of stockpiling before alighting on a line which asserts simply that Britain will run out of food. So, as the Brexit Secretary has made clear, we have no plans to stockpile food, said the government spokesperson. The UK is an excellent level of food security built on access to a range of sources, including strong domestic production. This will continue to be the case as we leave the EU, whether we negotiate a deal or not. Some retailers have said privately that they are making arrangements so that should supplies from the EU be disrupted, they will have plans in place to import from elsewhere. With floods in Spain last year washed out a large proportion of lettuces, supermarkets were forced to ration supplies and then import them from South America. This is the sort of contingency planning taking place. You certainly can't stockpile salad, said one retailer. So, as you can see, do you think it's a good idea to leave the European Union? No, because as we've said many times before on this channel, you always trade with your closest neighbours. You know, just upping away and just saying, oh, we'll do this, it's impossible. And if there's a brilliant clip, by the way, and I highly recommend you go watch it. It's of James O'Brien, and he talks to a WTO expert. And if you think trading on the WTO is an acceptable trading position that we can go to, then explain to me, as was pointed out in the interview, why no other country in the world operates solely on WTO rules. You know, this is just going to be a complete disaster if no deal happens. And I'm looking forward to it because Brexiteers are uniquely responsible. So when your family is starving and you voted to leave, remember, it's your fault.